welcome to another episode of the Humble Heretics Podcast. Your boy Brad.
This is your boy John.
And we're going to talk about labels today. We're going to talk about whether or not, using labels are, helpful. Are they a hindrance? Kind of just, go back and forth on that one. Kind of pull out all that we can on that, John. I kind of find them a useful hindrance because, well, let's just start with some of them, right? I'm a white Republican Calvinist, right? So I'm white. That one I really can't avoid. That one I can't really change.
Yeah.
Republican speaks to my politics, generally speaking, but it doesn't grab at all of my thoughts as an individual person.
Mm-hmm.
It just means I generally identify with that particular party. And then Calvinist, that's where I am theologically, and a lot of people don't like that. So yeah. I think it's useful in the sense that it gives you a landing spot, right? But I don't know beyond that, it's probably a hindrance.
Let me throw my labels out there. So I'm black. I am not a member of really any popular group of politicians. I tend to think of myself as a nationalist and a pan-African. What are the labels? Calvinism is in there, although I don't use that one so much anymore because I don't think it all the way encapsulates me anymore. But generally speaking, Calvinist is a label people would use with me. I'm a father. Look, there's lots of labels actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, I can go on for a little bit. And so the question we were talking about is, are labels helpful or hurtful, right? Do labels actually do us a service or do they do us a disservice? And I think that, my opinion on most things is usually pretty mixed. And it's no different here. I think that there are good labels and bad labels. I think that there are good ways to label things and bad ways to label things. I think that some labels are negative and they need to be negative. I think that some labels are positive and they need to be positive. Labels are a reflection of how people think about other people and themselves. They influence how personal identity is created. But they also allow for recognition that other people have different qualities, right? They aid people in understanding differences in needs. They talk about culture, your personalities. Labels can reflect your characteristics. They can set expectations. They can help provide goals. I think that labels being negative or positive is purely about what the label is, right? Part of this conversation, I think, stems from the ideas that we have in our modern day society of pronouns, for example. I think that's one of the places that this conversation can get kind of hairy for people, is the idea of someone being able to choose a pronoun for themselves, right? Maybe I want to be called he, him, but someone else may want to be called they, them, right?
Or he, they.
I don't know if that's a pairing, but
it is.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. I don't know. I'm not super versed in that area. I'm only using it in this conversation to say how people want to be referred to.
Right. Yeah.
Can be looked at as a good or a bad thing, depending on what side of the aisle you stand on the conversation. But ultimately, a label is an inert thing, right? It is not a morally defined thing. We apply value to the label, negative or positive, but a label stands alone, in my opinion.
Right. I think labels are honestly just good like conversation starters.
Sure.
It's a nice landing spot. Not a landing spot. Landing's where you end. Launching spot for a conversation, right? And you know, just imagine being at a house party and you have a bunch of people and you're talking about the forbidden topic of politics. And you know, one person's like, "Well, I'm a Republican," and "Well, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Libertarian. I'm actually not a member of either of those. I'm part of Andrew Yang's Forward Party."
Absolutely.
I'm in favor of forward. Not
I like
backwards.
the Forward Party.
For a reasonable person, that should be a launching point, right? Like,
yeah.
I would think that it would be helpful to me for a person to hear me say, someone were to say Republican, they'd think, okay, so generally this person doesn't want a lot of government interference in my own personal life, their personal life.
Right.
They probably could be socially conservative, so they might think that gay marriage is wrong and that abortion is wrong. And that people deserve to have more of their money, and or someone could say, I'm a Democrat, and I think abortion is a women's rights, women's health issue that's deeply personal in regards to themselves, and love is love.
Yeah,
and all of those kind of mantras that are tossed out of there, and strong central government, and we want more regulation, things of that nature, those natures.
Absolutely.
And I think really what determines whether a label is really helpful or a hindrance is the people that are on the conversational side of it, right? Because an unreasonable person isn't going to be, they're not going to hear someone else's labels and be like, oh, you're a Calvinist, so it means blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, you're a Republican, that means you voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. Right?
And so, I mean, yeah, it's true. There are MAGA Republicans, but there are non-MAGA Republicans too. And so I think that's the critical part in whether it's determining how someone is in regards to labels, and answering this question of helpful or hindrance is, reasonability. Are you a reasonable person? And that's probably where I jump off from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, podcasters all over the place, right? There's podcasters everywhere. And that's a label, right? Like, you're a podcaster. What does that mean? And more for two young guys, it tends to mean you're an idiot. We're trying our best to differentiate ourselves here from the wave of men everywhere that have unending amounts of commentary about dating and sex and what women ought to be doing, right? And so It's easy to lump yourself into that because of the label, right? Somebody says, hey, I have a podcast. And then people go, oh, I think you do. You must be one of those guys, right?
Right. Hate on women.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that it should be a launching point for analyzation, for understanding. But I think that the label alone doesn't do a good job of really telling you who someone is.
Right.
Right. So that's where I think we have to be just mindful of how we view labels. Someone giving you a label, a lot of times it's just to help you identify them. Example, I might tell someone I'm a Christian. But depending on their experience with Christians, that could mean a myriad of things.
Right.
Right. And the only way they're going to really know what I mean by that is if we have a deeper conversation and do some analyzation there and do some breakdown of what I mean when I say that. And unfortunately, we live in an era where so much has to be stuffed into clips, right? Your conversations with people, because of our attention spans now, it's very difficult to have in-depth conversations with strangers. And so someone gets a label, they run off with it, they're gone, and they think they know who you are.
Right. Well, because the requirement now in the field of discourse, in the field of conversation, as it were, to be well-spoken, means you need to be able to get your point across in the span of a single Instagram story or one TikTok video. That's the definition of well-spoken now, whereas well-spoken more than likely used to mean, you had an extensive vocabulary and you could say what you needed to say in the given amount of period in the most concise and precise way. Whereas it seems nowadays you can just throw your labels out. Someone thinks they know who you are exactly just from your labels, and that need to be both concise and precise is completely gone as well. Because the thinkers of old would never would have thought to leave precision out of the equation, right?
Right.
I don't think any of like the greatest Christian minds of the 1900s and before would have thought, oh well, yeah, I'm a Calvinist. I'm a Calvinist. Like, well, you don't think God is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't think they're having that kind of conversation. Like they those were men that were thinking, and labels weren't important to them. Whereas nowadays people kind of have to know what your label or your pronoun is to figure out who you are as a person. And it almost kind of wraps itself up into identity as well. Now your identity becomes part and parcel to what your labels are and your pronouns are.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I think you're right. I think, that's the danger. And that just speaks to the danger of our diminished ability to think overall in the modern society. We have tried to create such succinct understandings of things that require silence, sitting, meditation. Like, there are topics that people believe they can cover in 30 minutes that take years to understand. Here, an example on the topic of race. There is no way that someone in 1, 2, or 3 conversations could ever begin to really make the headway needed to really talk about what race is in America. It is something that requires you, if you want to understand it, if you really want to understand the dynamics of it, you have to commit to the long game. Be willing to read the books and do the work. Have the deep conversations. Sit, think, meditate, ponder on things. Be willing to be wrong. Change your opinion. Like, these are things that,
Right.
come along with. When I was growing up, I always wanted to study philosophy because I thought that, the greatest thinkers that we've ever seen were these philosophers. And I still think that holds true to some degree. Like, I think that some of the greatest thinkers we've ever seen are philosophers. I think the other way is true too. I think that some of the greatest philosophers we've ever seen are our greatest thinkers. And so we don't call them philosophers anymore, but they're still our greatest thinkers. And so when I listen to thinkers, it's never short, right? It's always nuanced, deep conversation in many different tones of color and shades. And
well, I think you do have that. I mean, they can go on with words and have these expansive thoughts. But have you ever listened to either like Dr. Alvin Plantinga or Jordan Peterson speak? Plantinga is one of the greatest philosophers that has ever lived on the Christian side, and I think he also has a lot of secular respect as well in the modern sense. The gentleman is incredibly succinct with what he says, but the words he chooses have so much to them that there's an incredible amount of depth to it that you can easily miss. Same thing with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a very well thought man, right? Like you can tell that this man sits, he ponders, he contemplates, he thinks deeply about things, and then when he speaks about them or writes about them, he is using succinct language, but he's using well picked words to express his ideas.
Yeah.
Whereas your common everyday man is just they go on these just diatribes that are just awful because the words they choose, they don't understand the issue at mind. Look, here's one. Here's a theological one I'll throw out there. Love God and do as you please, right? That one is a bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what do you mean do as I please? Like,
sure,
I can't do as I please, but love God.
Yeah, but so
you understand that? Love God.
I do.
Yeah.
But in the problem is you'll say that and people assume they know what you mean. So you say love God, but do as you please, right?
Right. That contemplation part they miss out on.
But if you don't sit and contemplate what that means, do the work, the mental work of processing it, you'll completely miss what's actually wrapped up in a phrase like that.
Right.
Right. It has a lot of nuance to it. And so this is what I'm talking about the willingness to hear something like that and not speak. Right. I think that's a lost art where these things are concerned.
You mean listening?
Well, yes, but then also meditating. If you hear something, stop, listen, think before you speak. I was just challenged recently on Twitter by someone about that. I tweeted, think before you speak. And the person goes, well, if you know, why would you need to think? Right? And the problem is you don't know. Right? You don't know. You only heard what I said just now. You haven't had the time to form a response properly before you spoke if you don't take that time. We
kind of want to be kind of like Mary. Mary heard all these things and pondered them in her heart, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because let's dive back into that little race thing, into that Mary heard and pondered these things in her heart. Like we find race in the U.S. reducible to black and white. Makes sense because it's been mostly black and white, right? But we think about the gang wars of the 80s in L.A. and such. It isn't that easy, right?
Right.
You've got black to black. You've got black to Latin kings, and you might have some of the Asian gangs in there. And so, on a large scale picture, you can talk about black and white race, and that's almost fairly easy to talk about from a historical standpoint. But that gets you in the pool.
Yeah.
It doesn't get you to the depths.
Absolutely. And there's a great book. I think I've recommended it on this podcast before. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Talking to Strangers. And in that book, he breaks down one of the problems of our society is that we do not know how to process the nuance of other people's backgrounds and cultures well enough to have meaningful interactions that help us navigate our day-to-day. And so we need to talk more to each other in an effort to understand one another. And so that's going to be, one of my big points in this podcast is to say we need to talk less, listen more, and then speak only once we've had a chance for thoughts to germinate and sprout and grow, and then we can speak after that. So I think that's one of the dangers there is that we speak too soon before we've had a chance to do that. And so, I think, just thinking about that, Talking to Strangers book again, we don't know people as well as we think we do. And we misjudge and we misunderstand strangers. And sometimes that has really bad consequences. And we need to think more about tolerance and patience in our dealings with each other, especially around labels.
You know, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. I think, and you probably do too as well. But Proverbs, you know, one of the books of the Old Testament. In fact, I think I might save that for my recommendation. The book of Proverbs concerns wisdom literature in the Bible in general. Just concerns itself with conduct and in regards to the tongue, not just from perspective cursing, but you know, speaking a careless word, and also the being deliberate with your choice of words and when you speak and how you speak, and whether you have this kind of propensity that's oriented towards listening or speaking. And the issue with the fool is the fool is someone who generally has a propensity to just mindless and careless speaking, because you do all this speaking, all this talking, you don't sit back enough to listen. And listening is where you gain understanding, surface level understanding, right? And from there that's where you can contemplate and ponder things in your heart to find to get into deeper understanding, right? Because
absolutely.
You can tell me, you know, it hurts me when I see, you know, young black men getting killed by police officers, right? I can hear that, and I can think to speak immediately against it, right? Just from using my label Republican, I could choose to speak against it immediately, or I can sit there and just kind of then let it sink a little bit and then counter argue it. That's a little bit fairer to your cause. Or I heard what you said, but you know, I got to think about that a little bit more deeply and leave and be comfortable enough to let the conversation end there, right? Just to walk away, and then instead of having to fight back and try to prove your point, you use that as an opportunity for uncomfortable self-reflection, or, you know, societal reflection. You know, is he onto something there? Is there something that is concerning about seeing young black men being killed by police officers? I think about, what was it, the officers in the Ahmaud Arbery case that got all those like life sentences or whatever, or was that Breonna Taylor? One of the two had a really big breakthrough with convictions, and I mean, that's a happy moment, but some people be quick to speak out against it.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Breonna Taylor. They just indicted. Federal charges were brought on 4 of the officers involved in that situation. So, yeah.
But thinking through that, right, and the implications and what that means just from a social standpoint for your neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know there are some people that, you know, their job, they're in the media, and they get paid to speak about that. But imagine being in the media and making sure that your words are poignant and deliberate and few.
Yeah, man. I have to stop and think. Right? Like taking the time to think before you respond. It's so bad, even in that, just now I'm just thinking, like, even in podcasting, like, you have to be ready to speak right away. Because if you pause to think, the dead air, people are like, yo, what's happening, right? It's too quiet. Even that is something we should just take time to think, like, it's okay to pause, to think before you respond to someone. Actually, you know what? For recommendations, I already know what I'm going to recommend now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to wait. Now, are you ready to do recommendations?
I can do recommendations whenever you're ready. You ready to get?
Yeah, let's do that.
Some recommendations. All right. Well, we'll be right back. And we're back. So you said you have your recommendation already on cue?
I do. I am ready. So, recommendation today actually is going to be slow down and think. Yep. So my recommendation to anybody listening to this is for the next 7 days, I want you to practice in your conversations pausing for 5 seconds before you respond to people when they talk to you. I literally mean someone saying, "Hey, how's it going?" You know what? I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. And just pausing to think about how you're going to respond and give yourself the license and the permission to respond honestly and sincerely, and just practice it. The other people are going to be thrown off. It's not about them. It's about you learning and practicing how to take the time you need to process information before you respond, and you giving yourself the time and the chance to respond in a meaningful way, and being a human and not feeling like you have to have robotic and rushed responses to everything. That's going to be my recommendation this week.
Man, I had to think about that for a second.
There you go.
My recommendation is for the good folks at home, regardless of whether you are religious or not, to read the book of Proverbs, because it would be beneficial to your soul to just read Proverbs. And so I'm going to read some of Proverbs to help you out and help me out, because I need to be better about reading the book of Proverbs. So I am going to read from Proverbs chapter 12, verses 13 through 20. And it says this, an evil man is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous escapes from trouble. From the fruit of his mouth a man is satisfied with good, and the works of a man's hand comes back to him. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. The vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but those who plan peace have joy. That is Proverbs 12, 13 through 20. And recommendation, stop and listen, think before you speak. My recommendation, read Proverbs. It's got so much good stuff in there, especially in regards to speaking.
And just sidebar about Proverbs, Proverbs has 31 chapters. It's really good for like a daily devotional.
Absolutely. And we'll be right back. There's so much there in regards to thinking about using our words, about contemplation, about labels. And it's one of the things I don't like from just a social aspect of the way society is, and I get it just from a theological standpoint. Man, it's sinful, and sinners are going to sin and everything, but the propensity towards writing a person off on the basis of a label, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You can't add anything of significant to my life because, pick your label, pan-africanist, right? You're a pan-africanist, you can't be a part of my life. You can't add anything meaningful to that.
Right.
Which is just,
Stupid.
That sort of homogeneity and keeping everything on like a sort of this black and white, color scale is not very colorful.
It's dumb.
Well, shoot, I mean, I can't do anything with your one-liners like that.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's stupid and dumb.
But people be dumb like that though. They would write someone off, and I'd rather life be a little bit more like Joseph's coat than to be a picture from the 1800s.
Dismissing anyone out of hand for a label that you don't understand the background or nuance of is stupid. Now, I'll give you an extreme example because I know there are people that will listen to this and go, well, if you're a member of the KKK, right? I go, yeah, but we can understand the nuance behind the KKK, right? They
don't have a lot of depth to them.
Right. We have a lot of information and access to information about the KKK. So that's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is when someone walks up to you and says, hey, I am a Pan-African, right? And if you don't know what that means, you don't have any knowledge of what that person is saying when they say that, and then you just dismiss them out of hand, well, that's stupid. And I could go into some long diatribe about why that's stupid, but to the person that does that, it doesn't even matter because that's stupid.
Right. They raise the crucifix and try and like bludgeon you away, like push you away like you're some evil spirit.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that. What is Pan-Africanist? Because I know that's one of yours.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a Pan-African. Generally speaking, it's just a matter of me being a black nationalist. I'm a Pan-African in the spirit of a mixture of W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. I believe that the black people in America deserve to have their own, and I believe that we are owed to have our own. What that looks like, and I think that has evolved over the years. But ultimately, I believe we are a nation. We're a people. We should be unified as a people, and we should be allowed to have a nation. And I'm saying allowed, not in terms of America allowing us, but in terms of the global community needs to acknowledge that those who were brought here from Africa have descendants here in America, and those descendants of African slaves are indeed still Africans. And so at our root, we are Africans. We belong to Africa. It's a much more nuanced thing that I could explain in 5 minutes, but suffice it to say, I believe in the unity of black people. I believe that we are owed certain things that any nation would have, and that includes land, and that includes economics, and that includes human rights and justice. So
obviously, I ignore the point of personal proximity in regards to crime. On the Pan-Africanist view, then, does that mean that it's viewed when black men kill other black men, it's viewed as a negative. It stymies the development of the Pan-African communities.
100%. So for me, again, I'm going to speak for myself because even within Pan-African thought, there are going to be differing opinions. So I myself am a prison abolitionist. And so I believe, that prisons are not helpful, right? And so that informs how I would respond to your question.
Right. The modern prison, right? Because we've talked about this before.
Yeah. So that for me, that's going to inform how I respond to your question. Overall, yeah, of course, black men killing black men is a negative. Right, it absolutely stymies the progress we're looking to make. But also, I acknowledge that in every race in the world, people murder people. Like, that's not unique to black men as much as the modern narrative might have you think, oh my God, black men, black on black violence. Like, no, there's no such thing as black on black
white
violence.
on white violence, right? Those are crimes of proximity, right?
Yeah, that's not unique to black people. So, murder is bad. Like, that's what it comes down to.
Jesus said murder is bad, so don't kill. Now you said W.E. Du Bois. I've heard that name before. He's one of Douglas's students, right? Frederick Douglass. Is he like a generation or 2 generations removed from him?
So W.E.B. Du Bois or W.E.B. Du Bois.
Du Bois.
I'm okay
correct.
I'm okay with either pronunciation. I think that he was as well. His name was William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, right? So he was a Pan-African civil rights activist. He's a sociologist. He's a socialist, and he was a historian.
Did not know that.
Yeah,
knew the historian part.
Yeah, so he was born in 1868, died in 1963.
So he could have learned from Douglas then.
Absolutely. What I would tell people about W.E.B. Du Bois is he was probably the most substantial leader amongst his contemporaries.
Right.
In black, and I'm talking about amongst black people, right?
Right. He would have been a giant to like Marcus and MLK and
so and I'm not here
Malcolm,
to give like
right?
a super deep breakdown of W.E.B. Du Bois, but I'll say this: Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois are more or less opposed in a lot of their ideology, right? Because they were both Pan-Africans, but W.E.B. Du Bois believed in education and raising up the black man in America through education. And he believed that if we did that, if we gave black people education, for example, sending us off to college, right? Like a lot of that rhetoric came down through W.E.B. Du Bois that, hey, listen, go to school, get your education, get your degree, and then you'll be equal with them, right? So unfortunately, I don't think that history bears that out, but that was one of his big things, right? Up from slavery, up from your ignorance, black man, up into knowledge and education. And by doing so, you make yourself equal with them.
Very pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality in a way.
In some ways, yeah, in some ways. And make no mistake, Pan-Africanism is about independence. It's about, it's not about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's about like, get some boots, right?
Yeah.
Like, and don't wait on.
Well, get your own boot, make your own boots,
Yeah.
put them on and pull them up.
Yeah. And don't wait on anyone else to say you can. Like, go out and do it. And
You always had that permission because of divine providence, right?
Yeah.
That's what our founding documents say.
Right. So that's a big part of Pan-Africanism is we don't believe in looking to anyone else to give us what we believe we're entitled to.
It almost sounds like this country was founded on that idea.
Yeah, well, if it was
I don't give a
right?
damn what you think about me, so we're going to do our own thing. That's what, and people are offended by that.
They are absolutely, oddly enough, because it's also not, because what we're also not saying is pull yourself up by your bootstraps in the sense of like don't expect anything, because I do have an expectation. My expectation is that justice is served, right?
Right.
And so,
real justice, not
Yeah.
some phony, justice that's based off of some of these erroneous, non-heavenward world views.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in that expectation, I do look at white America, specifically the American government, and I say, look, you guys owe a debt, and I believe we deserve to collect on that debt. That does not mean I'm looking for welfare. And that's where people will mischaracterize the argument because they'll say, well, you're looking for a handout. It's not a handout.
Right.
Right. If I worked a job for 40 hours, it's not a handout when I come back and say, you owe me money.
Yeah.
Right. And so in the same regard, we believe there is a debt owed to black society in this country, specifically the descendants of African slaves in this country. Now, I'm being very specific. Pan-Africanism is a global thing, right? It's about the African diaspora because Africa was raided and people were taken from Africa and shipped all around the world, right? There is an African diaspora in the world. And so I'm speaking only to American descendants of slaves right now, but Pan-Africanism is a global movement. You will find Pan-Africans on the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
Because again, it's about unifying all of Africa under one banner and flag and saying, listen, the world historically has done damage and done wrong to Africa and has divided Africa up Even the borders that exist today, a lot of the borders in Africa were erected through colonialism. And so those things didn't exist. When you go back and talk about slavery, Africa didn't exist when slavery began. What existed was not Africa. It was called something else, right? When you went there, the people didn't call themselves Africans. Colonialism brought in the idea of Africa.
Colonialism made Japan Japan.
Right, exactly. So now it's just about we need to remember that on the continent of Africa, we are a people, and across the world there is a diaspora of people that come from this continent.
Now you said Marcus Garvey. So Marcus Garvey, he and Malcolm are along the same lines of thought then, right?
So Marcus Garvey was a more militant-minded individual versus W.E.B. Du Bois. They were both big Pan-African thinkers. Marcus Garvey gets a lot of criticism because his methodology didn't pan out in the end, right? And so he made missteps and mistakes. I am much more sympathetic to Marcus Garvey and his life and his what he went through and what mistakes he made than you'll find a lot of people are. The critics of Marcus Garvey are super heavily critical of him because later in his life he did end up partnering in a way with white people, right? Because his thought was this, and I understand how he arrived here. He ended up coming to a place where he said, look, okay, even if you're in the KKK, right, you don't want us here, right? We don't want to be here. Let's work together to make it happen, right? And so that ended up with him being the subject of a lot of criticism because people said, how would you partner with our enemies? I, in hindsight, would say, I understood where his mind was. Do I think that was wise to put your trust in those people? No. But I understood how he arrived at that conclusion nonetheless. And so I still have a high level of respect for Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey has done more for black people in this country than many people, almost any of our major leaders. And so you brought up Malcolm X. Malcolm X was militant, but Malcolm X was not a Pan-Africanist. Malcolm X, for the majority of his adult life, was a member of the Nation of Islam. And so they have good ideas about forming a nation and so forth, but under the banner of Islam, not under the banner of being African.
So you said Marcus Garvey. I confused him for Stokely Carmichael.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no.
Because Stokely was the one that was exiled, and I thought Marcus was exiled and became Kwame Ture, but no, it's Stokely who is exiled.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, wait a second, this doesn't sound right, and I looked up him. Like Marcus Garvey was born in the 1800s. Like, okay, yeah, this is not the right person.
Yeah, no. Kwame, another great leader, but that's not Marcus. Marcus.
But in asking about your Pan-Africanism, it kind of ties. There's a tie back in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I asked you about your Pan-Africanism because I am relatively ignorant about the subject.
Sure.
But you said W.E. Du Bois.
Yep.
And you said Marcus Garvey.
Yeah.
And the education that not only that I've just received and the people in general that are listening to this who are also probably some of us who are equally ignorant on this matter, just learn that you have Garveyism, which is a school of thought, and then you have like Du Boisism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for you find yourself like somewhere hanging out in the middle between the two, and you take what you like from Du Bois, and you take some of the things that you like from Garvey, and kind of mesh them into Thomasism.
Yeah.
And so you could have said Pan-Africanist, and one, it could have gone way over my head if I didn't know what Pan-African meant.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then there's that broad schools of thought within Pan-Africanism, especially American Pan-Africanism, that you bring out. And that's the important thing, folks, is that whole discourse, conversation, and in the marketplace of ideas that, Janet Parshall likes to say all the time, a Christian talk show host, that marketplace of ideas that goes on is, I can't just accept Pan-Africanism unless from an ignorant mind, because if I accept it on the basis of ignorance, then I think it's racist. I could think I wouldn't say I think it is. I could think, right?
Of course,
it's possible the case that I would be racist, come to a racist conclusion, or or I don't come to a racist conclusion. Yeah. But the point remains is diving into those labels, right? Well, gaining understanding.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right about taking the time to understand what people mean when they say things, asking questions, and being willing to answer questions, right? It works both ways, because just to kind of wrap up and put a bow on the Pan-African thing, you're absolutely right. There are people that would hear some of what I'm saying, and some people hear about Pan-Africanism and they think that it's racist, right? And the reason they think that is because they're identifying nationalism with white nationalism. That's the truth, right? White nationalism does tend to have a racist tone because it's against other people. Pan-Africanism is not against anyone. It's only for black people. We don't concern ourselves with hating other groups. We only concern ourselves with building up our group. And so there's no hate for anybody. Listen, I love white people. I got white friends. I don't have a problem with white people. Listen to you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, why would you be doing a podcast for white people? Yeah. It's either your argument make an argument for something or against something. And from what I understood, and here's the thing is like,
nowhere in anything I said was it like, we're here to like trample on like anybody, really, any group, whether they be white, red, yellow, brown, whatever. There is no hatred for other people. Somebody asked Malcolm X once, and I like this quote, but someone asked Malcolm X what he thought about. He said, "Do you hate white people?" And Malcolm X said, "Well, that question is silly. White people don't even enter my attitude, right? I don't spend time thinking about white people. I spend my time thinking about black people." So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. You either make a positive argument for something or you make a negative argument against something. And my friend Tim, who I've talked to you about before, he says that before. He told me when I started trying to talk to this Roman Catholic girl that, you don't argue against a religion, argue for yours, right?
Yeah.
And that's the best way to win someone over, is to make a positive argument for your own view and let hopefully the process of their own personal contemplation lead them to that conclusion. So
absolutely.
I think that's a good place to land the plane.
We can land the plane right there.
So why don't you take us out? How can the good folks at home connect with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are wanting to connect with the Humble Heretics podcast, we are on Twitter at Humble Heretics 2. That's Humble Heretics with the digit 2 behind it. We are also on Instagram, Humble Heretics. We are on TikTok, Humble Heretics. And we have a Facebook group. You can find us there, Humble Heretics. Look us up, man. We're everywhere. It's Humble Heretics. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/Humble Heretics. So
there you go.
Yeah.
And that Patreon will get you into a Discord server as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope you subscribe. Hope you continue to listening. Jump in the conversation. Look past the labels. Contemplate. Think before you speak. And we'll leave this world off in a better place than we found it. And that's really what we want to do as hopefully just humanists of different kinds. So with that being said, we love y'all. Appreciate you for listening. And God bless.